Are you struggling with choosing the right binding method in Moho? You're not alone. It's one of the most common questions I get. Today, I'll break down my workflow by rigging Bandit from Bluey, step by step. Hey, how's it going? This is McCoy Buck, and in this video, I'll show you how I rigged this character for the animation you see here in Moho Pro. If you want to follow along, grab the free project file. The link is in the description. All right, now that you've downloaded the rig, this is what you're gonna see. You're gonna see the character. I removed the background, but I left the animation in, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this animation to test at the end of our tutorial if we have everything rigged properly. But I'm gonna show you how to save this animation into an action so we could actually clear our timeline and use it for rig testing. As far as the design itself, I did simplify it a bit. I took out a few extra reference layers because even though Moho 14 has had an update to the real-time rendering, once you get really heavy with reference layers and masks, it still tends to break. But if I do Control R and just render this out, you can see that everything still renders properly. So I just reduced some of these layers just to keep the main design simple. Okay, from there, what I would do is just have you go through and just start moving the dials around to see what the character's doing. So obviously these are pretty self-explanatory as far as the eye blink, the squash and the stretch, and then start moving the character itself around. So start bending his legs, start breaking his legs, you know, just see what this character is made to do. And one of the things you're probably gonna realize right off the bat is this rig, it's kind of cheap. And you know what? Yeah, it is. And that's because you don't need to create the perfect rig. You just need a rig that works for its purpose. So when I created this rig, let me hide that body texture so we can see a little bit better. When I created this rig, you know, I wanted to create it for this walk cycle. Oh, there we go. I totally meant to do that. Okay, I'm gonna delete those keyframes. When I created the rig, it was just meant for this walk cycle. I didn't want him to be in any crazy poses, or if I did, I would keep that in mind for his arm bends and things like that. So that's kind of one of the things that I want to talk about as well. On top of which binding method do I use, it's also kind of like which binding method is necessary. And again, that just depends on what you want the animation to be. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to clear this animation and we're going to save it into an action. So let's do that first. So come up here to Window and then go to Actions. Make sure that you're on the main bone group layer and that you have none of the bones selected there. And then come here to the new action button and we'll just call this walk. And I'll know that I'm in my actions window because I have this kind of pinkish timeline here. And from here, what I'm gonna do with this walk action highlighted is I'm gonna right click on the main line and I'm gonna select insert copy. And then you can just scrub your timeline just to make sure that that action was copied correctly. So mine is in this case. So now I'm gonna go back to the main line and I'm gonna close this action because we don't need that until the end. And then what I'll have you do at this point is let's reset the entire rigging on this character so you can see what it looks like, you know, right now as it should, and then what it's going to look like once we unbind everything. So with the main bone group layer selected, come over here to bone and then select reset all bone rigging. And now if I hit play, you should see something similar to mine. As you can see, the legs, they're no longer bound properly. The arms aren't even moving. The bone dials still work, but that's just because that's just animation tied to those smart bone dials. But if I come here to the head turn, this head turn, you can see this bone here. This face bone is actually, before we unbound everything, attaches all of the face assets to that bone. So the ears move with it, and then this face right here. So this face is going to be moving all of this stuff, his eyes, his eyebrows. So that's what that bone is doing. And then one more thing, I guess, as far as bone parenting, so you can kind of see what's going on there. This face bone is just parented to the head bone there. The face bone is the child bone, so it can move independently of the parent, but wherever the parent goes, the child will go. So that's just something that I have there, so when I'm bending the head and everything, that all those face layers will follow that. So that's pretty much it. So now you could actually just come and go to animation and clear animation from the document. You might have some leftover keyframes, but just go ahead and delete those. Okay, I'm gonna hit home on my home key and that just kind of center everything. And I'm gonna come here to my first layer. And this is another shortcut that I like to use. It's Shift Home, and that'll center your view on the layer that's selected. And then if you do Alt Home, that's actually going to center it on the points that you have selected. Okay, so if you're not familiar with liquid shapes, that's what this is using. So in terms of the design for this character, I just have it very simple. I have this, it's a mask, and it's using the liquid shape. I have the 2 fingers, and then I have the arm. So if I come here to the main arm part right here, if I have if I'm selecting it with the select shape tool and I come over here, you can see that you can't really see it now, but it said normal. That just means that this is unaffected. It's just a normal layer. But if I come to the layer right on top of that, this is set to clip. And liquid shapes are actually really cool. So you could actually subtract it. You could add to it. You can leave it as is. In this case, I have it clipped. And that's what's creating that clipping mask for that layer there. So that's all that's happening for that arm. And the back arm is the same thing. I'm going to do, let's see, Alt and then left click. And that's going to hide all the layers so you can just see that layer. And that's pretty much the same thing for this arm as well. I just have that main arm, the design, and then the separate shapes. So if I do Alt and right click or left click again, there we go. That's going to bring everything back in. So let's start with binding the arms and the legs, since that's going to be the easiest thing. So the binding method that I use probably like 90% of the time when I'm starting out any of my rigs, unless it's like super obvious, like, oh yeah, that's a layer binding. That's just a cup being held to the hand. The cup doesn't have any joints. It doesn't need to move. I could just bind the layer to the hand. Other than that, if it's not super obvious, I just start doing what was flexi-binding, now called link bone binding. I just do that for all of the layers. So I'm going to go to all the bones that are relevant. If I select an additional bone, you can just hold down Control and then deselect it. But I'm holding down Shift using my Select Bone tool, and I'm selecting all those bones. And then I'm going to come here to Link Bones. So now that's going to be linked. And what we're going to do is we're going to come here to frame 12, and we're going to go back to the bone group layer. And let's set up a pose that we could start testing our rig with. That's how I know anyway. This is my workflow. That's how I know that my rig is, starting to come together. Is I pick a pose, like similar to like his walk, what I want him to actually do, and then I start rigging according to that. And usually I'll have like multiple poses on my timeline here. So in this case, we're pretty much just doing a walk cycle, but if he was to be jumping and bending down, bending his legs, I'm going to be thinking of all those different poses that my animation needs and start rigging for that. So right now we're just going to do it for the walk. So let's have, let's have his arm go out like this. This arm go like this. We'll have his foot go out, his leg go up, vice versa. His leg go up and whatever. Okay, and then, yeah, so something like that. So obviously you're not going to get a very good result as far as that pose. And then what I like to do is I use the toggle frame 0 shortcut, which is cool that this was added in Moho 14. But you can use the keyboard shortcut, which I like to use, as Control-Shift-D. And what we're going to do is we're going to rig, as you can see there, like with the arm, we're going to rig the different pieces, and then we're going to go to frame 12, and we're going to test it, and we're going to see if it looks good. So with that arm, that's where we started. Let's go to the arm back, just so we can get the arms and the legs out of the way. And they're pretty quick too. And let's just go ahead and select all the bones that are going to be linked to that arm, and we're going to link it. Do the same thing. I'm going to do Alt right click. Now to break down how this legs works, it's similar. It's also a liquid shape. It's got those clipping masks. It's got like a, if I can select it, it's got a shadow clipping mask there. And then you have your foot clipping mask. And then the foot itself, its design, it's just separate. It's just 2 separate shapes there that are coming together underneath of that clipping mask. Let me turn that off. Oh, my wife made me a snack. She's awesome. That's pretty much how that's going to work. And this just has the target bones for the feet there. So his feet have targeting from that ankle there that are following that bone as I move it. So we're just going to select those 3 bones. We're not going to select the foot bone or the target bone, and we're going to link that bone. And again, I need to make sure that I have that layer selected. So right now I'm just on the main bone group layer. Alt right click to select that layer that I want to do the link binding to, and go ahead and do that. I'm gonna do the same thing, Alt right click to quick select that layer, select those, and then link bind. Okay, and then Alt Control Shift D, and I'm gonna go back to frame 12 and check that out. Everything is working pretty good. I would say the only other thing about this foot, or about this this leg, is the feet. Which, what is going on? It doesn't look like there's. Let's go back to frame 0. Okay, the feet also need bone strength, because that's what link bone binding. I gotta get used to saying this. Link bone binding uses. So let's do the same thing for the feet. Let's add some bone strength. So I'm gonna select both of those bones with the select bone tool. Hit S on the keyboard, and let's just, I don't even know what we need. So let's just do 0.35. Sure, that looks good. Okay, so now let's see. All right, this is where I can now see, okay, here's the limitation for link bone binding. If I now need more control, I'm gonna use point binding. So this is, again, this is the process that I do. I just start with link bone, and then from there, if I need more fine control, I do point binding. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take it at an extreme pose that I know we'll still use. So let's take a look at our reference here. So as you can see, like his foot, his tail's getting in the way because those bone dynamics are going wacky. All right, let me turn those bone dynamics off because that's kind of breaking at the moment. So his foot, as you can see there, it's kind of at that bend. It doesn't ever really go too extreme. Yeah, so there's a little bit more bend that we need to consider for that. So what I like to do is I like to put it in whatever that extreme pose is. So right there, that actually looks pretty good. But if I move this down, you can see now the mask as well is starting to break. It's starting to go inside the foot there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the points that seem to be problematic, which looks like it's these ones. So these are the ones that need more fine control using point binding. So I'm gonna go back to frame 0, and with everything selected as it is, I'm gonna go to my bind points tool. And that, like I said, that bone is already selected and those points are selected. I'm gonna go to bind points. Let's go back to frame 12 and let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks a lot better. There's a lot more control there. It's not breaking. It's not warping like it is right there. So that looks pretty good. This, obviously you don't want to go super extreme. Everything will break. But as far as like the mobility that he has right now on that foot, that looks pretty good. Let's fix this mask. Let's see what's going on with that. What we could probably do, we could either do one of two things. You could either make it wider, if you want to be lazy, or you can just select those 2 points and you could split it. Yeah, and that's just going to create, a joint so that it's not overlapping your other design there. So let's do the same thing for the other foot. So we know that it's going to be at that point. So to deselect a point, if you have another point selected, you're just going to hold down Alt and drag, and then I'll deselect that point. So we have those points selected. I need to hold down Alt to select the bone. So where is that shortcut? Ah, there we go. Alt to select a new bone. It erases those points. So what you need to do as far as the process, what I need to do, hold down Alt first, select your bone, and then select your points. Cool. We just learned how to do that together. So now I'm going to select these 2 points because I know that's the next part that I need to fix because that's looking good as far as the foot. And I'm just going to split it. Cool. So feet are done. If you think this video is helpful and you want to see something like this as a series for different characters, let me know in the comments. So I'm actually going to hide that. I'm going to hide the feet, the legs, and I'm also going to hide the arm, both back and front. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay. So now with the head turn, like I said, that face bone is tied to that head turn rotation. And what we want to do is bind all of the assets that you can see here that would make up that head turn. So his eyebrows, the eyes, the muzzle. At this point, this is where it's obvious to me that it's like, okay, I would just need to do layer binding. Because layer binding, you can only bind one layer to one bone. With flexi binding, you can bind one layer to multiple bones. So I know in this case, like I got, the mouth stroke and then the muzzle itself going up here. Oh, right here. So this head dark blue, that's just so that it completes the design. I want to keep the blue texture behind his eyes. And then this part right here in front of the muzzle to match the original character design. The nose, which is also a liquid shape. A lot of these are also liquid shapes. The eyes are liquid shapes. That's actually the really cool thing about liquid shapes is this is all one layer right here. You no longer need to make multiple layers for an eye, which is fantastic. But yeah, as you can see there, it's just clipping using that liquid shape as we did before with the arms. And then you have your eyebrows. So let's start with the eyebrows. So to do your layer binding, it's pretty straightforward. You just go over here to the bind layer tool once you have your layer selected, and you just bind it to the bone. And in this case, it's going to go to the face. We'll do the upper, the nose, do this part of the head. And then I'll get into this because this is kind of where you need to be careful. When it comes to layer binding a group, you can do that. I think it's the only binding method that lets you do that is the layer binding. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. But now let's say I have something else that is maybe attached to other bones within the mouth, like the tongue. Maybe the tongue has bones attached to it. As you can see, as I'm clicking through the rest of these layers, I no longer have that option to bind. And that's because the main group that is layer bound is now overriding that binding function for any of the layers inside of that group. You can bind an entire group. You can bind the individual layers inside of a group, but you can't do both. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you do bind a group and then your bones are like missing, you're like, what the heck? That's why that's doing that. So I'm going to just leave that as is because for what I need, I don't need, these whiskers bound to any other bones. They're all being bound to the same bone. So that's how I'll leave that. And then for the eye back, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bind that to the face. And then that head dark texture there, I'm going to bind that to that same bone. And that should take care of that. So I'm going to go back to frame 12 and I'm going to test that on my head turn. And there we go. And like I said, if we take that bone and we just move it around, we could also test that to see that all of those assets are attached like they should be. Okay, so far we've learned link bone binding and point binding and layer binding. So we already went through all the binding methods, and now we're like figuring out, okay, cool. If it's not link binding, link bone binding, then I need to give it more control. Then I need to add points, which is really cool about link bone and point binding. With those legs, I still have them. Part of it, of that foot even, is all link bone, and then the more parts that I want finer control is point bound. And something about point binding that I didn't know this, but if it's not quite obvious to anybody else, so your bone has an origin point for its rotation and everything. If I go back to this right here, it's got, here, let's do this so I can see my points at the same time. I'm gonna remove the fill and the stroke from the display just so you can see this a little bit better. So as I'm moving that around, the rotation for points is always going to be absolute. It's always going to maintain the same distance from that origin point. So if you were looking at this like there's a circle around each one of these points, they're constantly, you can't really tell at that point, but they're going to be moving around at an absolute distance relative to where that bone is. So once I start moving that bone, out to here, those points are always going to maintain that same distance. Cool, huh? Am I the only one that didn't know that? I think I am. Okay, so let me go back to my fill and my stroke, turn that back on. Okay, so we just did layer binding. I'm going to hide that leg. And let's go ahead and let's do the next part. So the next part is the belly. Actually, the whole body. So let's open that layer back up, or that group. So I got the hair texture, the back, and I'll toggle these so you can see these a little bit better. Some of them aren't very obvious. The yellow spot, and then that bluish spot on his belly, and then the body. And like I said, a lot of this, they're in masks. What the heck is this? So what we're going to do for this is we're going to go back up to the top, and we're going to determine, okay, when the body's moving, like the top of the body here, there is some influence there. So let's go ahead and let's throw these two bones to influence that body part, that, whatever it is, the hair texture. It's not a body part. And then just do link bones. We'll do the same thing for the back texture. We'll do link bones. So again, it's pretty straightforward stuff. It just takes some tweaking. That's the part about rigging, is it's trial and error. I think it's a pretty fun process overall. And then the blue spot, and then the body. So the body obviously is the whole body here. And if I select the layers in the body, there we go. Okay, so you can see that these are the points that make up the body. And if I bind those points to these two bones, that should be enough, right? Well, don't just guess, test it out. In this case, you know, honestly, I other than just having these body parts rigged to something, look at that. There's really nothing going on there that's exciting. But if we wanted to, you know, finesse this a little bit more and make this look a little bit better, the first thing that you're actually going to realize is that bone influence for those two bones, it's fighting. And what I mean by that, if we go back to frame 0, you can see that this bone here has the bone strength and this top bone has the bone strength. And as I create that body bend, depending on how I have that bone strength distributed between these two bones, you know, either the head's going to come apart, which is going to separate itself from the ears. So I probably don't want to have that. But if I try to increase the strength down here, you know, so it's fighting the two influences. So this is actually an example to where it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe we might need to use a little bit of bone strength or bone linking and point bone binding for this example. And I won't go too far into the weeds because, like I said, he's not even bending his body and you wouldn't even know. So if I was to try to fix this, I would probably first take this bottom bone here and let's see, I think I would, because I want when this bottom part of his body bends, I want this still to follow like it is. So it doesn't make sense to bind to this bone. So let's just do that just so I can show you the wrong way first and then we'll do the right way. So with that bone selected, I'm going to bind it to that body part. And then let's say, this won't be as clear, but let's just leave it as is. I'm going to go to frame 12 and I'm just going to test it. So now you can see, okay, it doesn't make sense to bind to that body part because that will only move when the root bone moves. And you actually can't even move a root bone, rotate it, unless you hold down Alt on the keyboard. And at that point, you know, it's not what I would want most likely for this type of character. I think, if I remember right from the TV show, I think he does, let's go. I think he does bend down from that. I don't know. See, that I would at that point use reference to make sure, but I think he does bend from that part of his body. I don't think you know, but let's say in this case that I want to, you know, just bind these points to the bottom there. Let's do that. Let's rotate it. Looks pretty good. How about the top? How's that looking? That's looking pretty good. That's not looking too bad. And that's probably where I would leave that. So we got the yellow spot. So when that bends, same thing. Maybe instead of, you know, the whole thing bending, maybe we could just go back to my main bone, deselect those bones. And then we'll bind the points to the bottom there. Hopefully at this point, you kind of know what I'm doing and it's making sense. Because like I said, it's just trial and error. So I'm just testing out to see what's working, what isn't. It's kind of embarrassing to show the process because, you know, that it's literally just that. It's just trial and error. You know what? Let's go back. I don't know if I bound those points properly. That was weird. Okay. The bend here. You know, that looks okay. It doesn't look great, but it's good enough. Again, because for this character, honestly, he's just walking. So I'm going to go back to frame 0. So now the last thing I'm going to take a look at is his ears. So his ears right now, they're not where they should be. They're not working with the head bone. And that's just because we haven't bound them yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to select the ears. And as you can see, they're all just on the same layer there. So let's just go ahead and just bind all of these. I can tell you already this isn't going to work, but just so you can see it, I'm going to hit link bones. Because right now, like I said, we have all that bone strength that are influencing or trying to influence the ears, but now Moho doesn't know, okay, well, which ear am I influencing? You know, so it's doing a little bit of everything. The ears themselves, they have nothing for those points to be anchored to because they're just, you know, tied to the bone strength, so they're just kind of floating around. So this is where we need to give ourselves some more fine control. So the first thing I need to do is I need to anchor those ears to a bone that's not this bone. Unless I make it so that this bone doesn't move, which I could do that. You know, I could come here to bone constraints and I can constrain that. But then at that point, you know, the bone itself will be a little bit too rigid, or the ears will. I want to give them a little bit more flexibility. But I want to bind the points of that bottom ear to my head bone. And I'm going to select both of those ears rather. And then I'm going to select this bone. And of course, I did the order of operations wrong. So select that bone first, select the points, bind the points, boom. And then again, we'll test it. Okay, it looks, you know, kind of all right. I need to give myself more control. Right now, there's too much flexibility. There's too much of that bone influence, and there's not enough exactness. And that's where point animation comes into play. I go to my bind points and select that bone, bind it, select that bone, and bind these top points to that bone. Okay? Because remember, again, I didn't really realize this. It wasn't completely apparent to me. That origin of that rotation of that bone, those points will always stay at the same amount of distance wherever I rotate those bones. Okay, so now we have a little bit more control in those ears. And you know what? I think we have everything bound. So at this point, let's bring it all back. Just do a little bit more testing here. There we go. Oh, you know what? Yeah, the tail. The tail was the last thing that I completely forgot there. So with the tail, we just have the tip and we have the tail base. And again, you probably already got this figured out by now. We're just going to do link bones. And if it doesn't work, then we'll work with it. Okay, yeah, that's working perfect. Look at that. That looks really good. When I am walking with this character's tail, why isn't that second bone moving? Oh, you know what? It still has bone dynamics on it. Okay, so I have bone dynamics on the tail, which, oh, that's weird. Okay, with the manipulate bone, it doesn't move it. But when I use the transform bone tool, when it has bone dynamics on it, it does move. So there you go. There's another tip for you that we just learned in real time. But that's working good. So the tail, when I say it's working good, obviously it looks hideous going here. But that's because I'm not creating the perfect rig. I'm only creating it for its purpose. And the only direction that this tail is going currently is there. Oh, and then check that out. Oh, that animation's perfect. It just gets better and better. If you ever need to revert, there's a handy option there, just to right click and then revert. So let's see that again. Okay, so that's what the tail should be doing. In terms of advice, if you're doing tails, it's best to do them straight. So as best you can, get them symmetrical on both sides, have the bones centered, so that when the tail itself is going up, you know, you can set the binding, or you can rig it so that it goes up, but that it doesn't struggle to go in the opposite direction. That's why this looks so bad. That, and I don't even think I have design set up. Yeah, see, it's like, as far as the design, I don't even have like a joint for the tail for it to bend the other way, which is why it doesn't bend the other way. But other than that, for the rig itself, for everything that we want to bind it to, that's my workflow. Now we're going to see if this works. So I'm going to go back to my main bone group layer there. I'm going to delete these points, and let's bring back our animation that we saved. So we have the walk animation there. I'm actually going to go to frame 1, because that's how Moho knows that we're wanting to copy the animation back into our timeline. If we're on frame 0, it's not going to give you that option. I'll show you. So I have the main timeline selected. So I right-clicked the walk, didn't work. Go to frame 1, right-click the walk, and then insert copy. Okay, so now let's play the animation, and let's see if we have this thing rigged properly. Boom. I don't know about you, but that looks pretty good to me. But now that you saw the behind the scenes, you know this rig is ugly as F. And that's how you figure out which binding method you need. If this is still a little too complicated for you, I suggest watching this video here, and this should clear things up. If you like this video, subscribe. If you like the video, like it, and I'll see you later.